briefest hello. Thank you very, very much for coming on a rainy evening. My name is Siobhan Davis, and I am delighted to have Paul Clarke and Katie Mitchell here to talk. I will tell you very briefly how this came about. Probably 2 years ago, I wanted to look at the word choreography, which, given that I'm a choreographer and have been for about 35 years or something, was a bit of a strange event. And one of the ways in which I thought I would do it is look at artists that I admired, whose work I would go to with the idea that when I left that performance or that event, I would be able to go back into the studio and re-look at the word choreography, because I felt that they had impacted on my intelligence towards it. And one of the first people I went to was Katie, and so I am thrilled that she's here part of a relay, which is, while she and I spoke about choreography, I relayed it on, would she be able to choose someone outside her discipline to talk about making? Now, they may go further than that, but that was the initial trigger. I know,
We're doing our brief.
That's fine, that's fine. It'll be a good conversation, and it will be about artists at work, which to me is a great thing to listen to. I've got this fantastic microphone, but when you want to ask questions later, can you wait for a microphone to come to you, because this is going to be recorded properly, and it would be great to be able to hear what you want to say rather than you yelling out into the distance and nobody hearing you at all. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to start by talking about the difference between the two of us. So I am a theatre director, and Paul is a composer, right? And in my way of describing it, I classify Paul as a primary artist and myself as a secondary artist. So in my description, a primary artist is someone who starts with blankness. It can be a blank page, a blank canvas, blankness. And a secondary artist is someone who starts with some pre-existing material. In my case, it tends to be a play script. So it tends to be words. It can be a poem or a play or a novel. So that's my opening definition.
And I'm going to challenge some of those.
Oh, yes.
Thoughts. I mean, although you're right, when we sat down last week, we thought, what should we talk about? And our instincts were very different. So I had a sort of blank sheet of paper and had a few things that we might talk about, whereas Katie immediately went to the letter that we'd been sent with the list of things that we might use, and had this bullet pointed limitations, constructions of the few things.
That was from them, wasn't it? Yeah. The people.
And so in the spirit of collaboration, we've kind of hedged and have kind of actually following some of those themes, but bringing in a couple of ones which we thought were also relevant. The sort of primary secondary thing is the first of them. So I'm going to sort of show some images and play some music, some of my music, and Katie's going to show some images from shows that we've worked on together, because we have worked on many things together. And so, I mean, I'd say it's a grayer area for me, the primary and secondary thing, because most of the things that I do end up being appropriated in some way. Even pieces that I wrote with no plan to for them to ever be used ended up being taken, shown either in a theatrical context or opera or in a gallery or something. Even in this piece that I wrote years ago, which was a kind of it was a homage to Les Dawson and the wrong note things that he used, which has sat in my bottom drawer for absolutely years. An artist called Mel Brimfield called me and said, "I'm doing this thing about Les Dawson. Would you mind writing a piece based on all his wrong note piano stuff?" And that's fantastic. So that ended up going on in front of a load of her pictures in Liverpool last year. So I thought I'd start with a piece which was definitely a primary thing. This is a piece, I have a company called the Claude Ensemble, which is started by me and a director called Susie Wilson. And this was a piece that I actually wrote for 7 singers. And I was literally working on this piece. Susie heard the work that I was doing and said, "I'd like to make something to that," and it became a piece that had a life of its own. I didn't change a note of it. It's been done in several contexts. This version, well, this one here, that was at the V&A, and that was just with singers. This one had some performers. There was no spoken text. It was sort of choreographed, although they were kind of physical performers rather than trained dancers. I'll play you a bit, shall I? So sometimes I work like that, and it happens with quite a lot of clod pieces and also sort of operas that I've written, where I basically constructed a musical form, and someone else decides exactly what the visual content is, and I may have nothing to do with that visual content or something, depending on the collaborators. And I'm personally quite open to both. One of the reasons why when you invited me to work on something, which was about 5 years ago or something like that, one of the attractions was actually the fact that I knew that you had your own thing, and that I was quite happy to serve a completely different process to the one that I was used to. So other thing, I mean, I'm just playing something recently. This is a piece called Must. There's another clod piece which we did with the performer, a performance artist from America called Peggy Shaw, who some of you may know, which is a monologue. In this case, the form was completely given to me. I ended up writing this sort of jazz, in fact this bit isn't jazzy at all, but it's a kind of jazz trio for a monologue that I had nothing to do with this
Deep
structure.
Inside me, I have doors and locks and combinations.
The images of
I keep
the piece is about Peggy describing the inside of her body. I'm going to just stop that. So these images are shown. That's the ear. That's the eye. Amazingly. And I just wrote some incidental music.
Deep inside me, I have doors and locks and combinations, which I keep well oiled and flexible. That's expensive. Inside me is expensive. This is the room next to a doorway on the 3rd floor. There's a tall window looking out into the sky with a difficult combination. 1958. It's night. All is dark and all are asleep. We can walk around and listen to the sounds of people sleeping. Their breath, their pain is lit up in the dark like those fluorescent constellations you stick on the ceiling. This is a cot in a hallway next to the window.
So basically, I would say I'm pretty happy doing stuff which is incidental, if I like, or leading. I'm pretty happy to have a blank page, or a completely full page, or a half-filled page.
And I don't like blank page.
Well, I don't know. I'd say that you do. You like to have a. You like some areas of clarity on the of blankness, which you can manoeuvre into. Maybe optional blankness. It's true. You haven't done anything which is completely from nothing. Shall we move on to the second of our categories?
Yes. Do I have to read my thing here?
Yes. So this is a bit from a book by Georges Perec that we came up when we were discussing what we were
very interesting
to talk about.
Very interesting book.
So, do you want to read page?
Yeah, I'm going to read a little bit to you, and you're just to listen. That's all.
Yeah.
And then Paul will reveal what you've listened to. But though I now know, as you do, that this law holds against us that which all of us do, that which all of us say, that not any word of ours is what you might call fortuitous, for it instantly and invariably has its own justification, and thus its own signification, I can't stop thinking that I'm a sort of roman à tiroir.
I can't say it, but yeah.
A thick Gothic work of fiction with lots of plot twists and a Russian doll construction, a work in which an author's imagination, functioning without limits and without strain, an author, mind you, making a mighty poor living by today's standards, having to cough up 1,000 words an hour for virtually instant publication, churning out paragraph upon paragraph, writing his daily ration of incongruous scribblings till it's coming out of his nostrils. A work, as I say, in which an author's imagination runs so wild, in which his writing is so stylistically outlandish, his plotting so absurd, of an inspiration so capricious and inconstant, so gratuitous and instinctual, you'd think his brain was going soft.
And the reason why we picked that passage, it's an anecdote. I was talking to the translator of that, Gilbert Adair, about the challenges of translating that piece by Perec. I don't know if some of you may know this. It's quite a famous book in French. It's called La Disparition, and the whole book doesn't contain the letter E, which is the most the most used letter in English and in French too. It's an almost impossible task if you try and speak a sentence. It's actually quite hard to say something. There's one which doesn't have the letter E. There's 2 or 3 more. So it's extraordinarily hard. There it is. You can see some of it. And I was talking to Gilbert, and he was saying, what would you do musically? You can't have that kind of limitation. What you do, you can't just have a piece that just doesn't have F sharp in it. And I said, well, no, it's exactly the opposite. That musicians are just hungry for those kind of limitations. Any piece, if a piece is in C major, it only has 8 notes, and you don't use those things, and you actually relish and enjoy those kind of limitations. So even at that micro sort of level, musicians bring those limitations on themselves. At broader level, like structural stuff, like things like sonata form or something like that, where you have an idea, and you maybe idea A, play that for 8 bars, and then you play another idea for 8 bars, idea B, and then you maybe repeat A in a different key, and then B in a different key, and then maybe have them playing on top of each other. Those strict sort of forms, and not just in classical music. So jazz seems to have, even though it's an improvised form, it seems to have formal rules which people stay with. They'll play the theme, and then they'll run through each instrument improvising, and then they'll come back and play the theme again. Or a pop song, even fairly sort of avant-garde bands with avant-garde tendency, Velvet Underground, they're pretty much verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus structures. So musicians, I would say, really, really attract and often feel a bit lost without those kind of crutches of limitations. And we'll talk maybe later a bit about the sort of the broader kind of architectural stuff, which is maybe a bit hazier.
But you do take it to extremes, don't you?
I do.
I mean, recently you really took it to an extreme.
So yeah, it was a real invitation. So Katie was directing this play, Pains of Youth, which was set in 1921 in Vienna, and I would say almost everything that we're listening to, possibly with the exception of the thing with Peggy Shaw, I'm looking for a limiting thing. So there's a piece later on where I included a melody which was written by the person whose foundation funded the composition of the piece. In the Silver Swan that I played earlier on, that was all using just one melody written by a composer in the 18th century. I'm really hungry for it. So this one was set in 1921 in Vienna, so it just had to be 12-tone music, which is that particular form pioneered by Schoenberg that some of you might know about, which I hadn't actually done since I was about 20 as an exercise. I'd done it anyway, so I thought I'd play some of these. These are outrageously limited, where you have to run through every single note, one by one, all 12 notes in the scale, and then start again and do it again. You're not allowed to play one note 5 times in a row. That would be cheating. we'll talk a bit about cheating. Here's one of the pieces. Oops. Let me go back. So cheating. We were talking just before you came in about this, the point at which you bend your rules. So that one was absolutely strict. I wanted to do, and there's a couple of ideas that were required, like a waltz. We had to have a waltz in at some point. I found it's almost impossible to write a
12-tone waltz.
A 12-tone. Well, you can write a 12-tone waltz, but not one which could plausibly be played on a gramophone in 1920s Vienna. So I sort of cheated. I wrote the melody in 12-tone completely, strictly, and basically each bar moves on. So I do repeat the note twice, but then I move on to a different one. So that for me was a kind of creative bit of rule breaking. I just basically set a new rule, which was slightly less insane, but. To make it sound tonal, it was atonal. And you sort of end up in this world. I mean, there's absolutely no way I would write a piece that sounded like that if I hadn't been presented with that rule. It would just never occurred to me. Usually, I would write a... I'm just going to stop this, because I can't talk and listen at the same time. Usually I would have a tune, and when I know exactly where I'm headed, I'm scrapping to write it down before I want to move on. Whereas that, I will hear it and go, well, I can't do that. I'll have to look at this architecture. I really enjoyed it, actually.
So in order to counter the terror of the blank page, you put a rule down first.
Exactly. And
then write.
Well,
so in fact, it's not so dissimilar to the process by which I would read a play.
Yeah, well, I would say it would be more like having an idea for a play. The sort of rule that I'm using there would be more akin to maybe, I don't know, saying your piece is going to have a family of 4, a dog, a murder, and something like that, and then you'd be left to decide who killed who and how and when, or something like that.
Great, we should do that.
I think you should do
it. That's a very good idea. But the limitations that are normally my limitations in my planet of secondary artist, they tend to be actually very banal. There's a play, it has a cast size, and it has, it's a genre, so it's either realism or surrealism, and there are budgets. Often they are very, very interesting limitations, budgets, very real ones actually, hidden from audiences, but they are real. And then there is the place where the play is going to be staged, the nature of that space acoustically or just visually, whatever it is. So for me, the initial limitations tend to be quite banal. Then there are more sort of subtle limitations. So there would be like the idea structure underpinning the text selected, which does act as a restriction. You can't do something about war and violence like Women of Troy and set it in peacetime. that would be sort of impossible to do, because that would sort of completely dismantle the limitations of the idea structure. But finally, the thing that I became interested in when we started to have this conversation was I was going through all my banal limitations that are about the text, and then I realised that actually the things that are my more interesting rules don't actually come inside the text. They're the things that I impose. So I suppose we were talking about whether we call them constructions. So
we decided that we would.
We would call them constructions because that entertained us, writing a script in order to communicate making. So we're going to call them constructions. So for me, there is a text. It could be like a novel, a play, or a poem, and it contains limitations that restrict my creative choices. Then I add to the mix constructions, which are just new rules. So, for example, I might take a novel like The Waves by Virginia Woolf, and I might say, well, we're going to stage it using 3 live cameras, and the rule is that all the visual information that's going to run alongside is going to be made live, and we're going to watch the making whilst we watch the output. And then all the sound is going to be mediated. That means it's going to go through a microphone. All the spoken sound and all the sort of sound effects. The music is going to be played live. And so bit by bit, I'm just sort of laying down some very sort of simple rules at the start of the process, which everyone has to adhere to, and they generate the form of what the audience then see.
And so I would say that despite your protestations of being a sort of secondary artist, you've actually got a lot of the same attraction to giving yourself rules. And I know from watching you work that you're very reluctant to let a rule drop without very, very good reason. So really something good. Like, for example, I'm showing some stills here from the rehearsal room or it's actually in the theatre, isn't it? Yeah. Of Waves. So you can see that there's angle poises on the desk there, and I do remember. Yeah.
And they're made in the 40s, actually. Those living objects, aren't they?
Yes. And there was some discussion when we got into the theatre about whether, just because we'd been using these angle poises all the time.
The key lights for all the shots.
And you pretty much decided, in a sort of rather 12-tone way, to no, we were going to stay with this, even though there's hundreds of lights and lighting designers and people to run up ladders to facilitate a more fancy lighting thing. That everything was going to be done using these things, including exterior scenes, which were all done with sort of boards behind people's backs. But
that's because I was so interested in what would happen. At the making level, you'd see a crude angle poise light just being repositioned like that, and then in the film output you'd see something exquisite generated. So I was really interested to keep the maximum tension, hence the rule, between the use of the angle poise and beautiful output. And I liked the fact that it imposed on my collaborators restrictions that meant that they had to be slightly more lateral or imaginative. So the video designer was like fighting like fuck to let go of this rule, because it was so restricting what he was able to do with the lighting. But I insisted, and there he had to be creative with angle poise lights.
And that created a whole sort of style of work, didn't it?
It definitely did.
Although the one with, so on Waves, that all the camera work was actually done by the actors. Again, even though there were stage hands around who could have been working that.
I have changed the rule on that.
Exactly.
So by the time we started to do live film and theatre work in Germany, where there was a bit more money as well, we started to integrate.
I haven't got any.
We haven't got any.
I'm just flicking through.
We started to integrate cameramen. Actually, with a cameraman. Wasn't a camera woman, sadly. We had a cameraman in Germany who did the work together with the actors. So I just broke the rule because I wanted to raise the bar on what we were doing. But I realised, you were talking about cheating earlier, I just break the rule when I choose to break the rule. It's completely unreasonable, illogical, inconsistent, and really irritating.
But it's when it's ceasing to become creative, isn't it?
Why do I hold on to the angle poises really intensely? you know, against the artistic aspirations and desires of some of my team, and then let go of them.
I think it's big when it stops being useful.
I think maybe it is, but
I mean, if you were spending 8 hours a day dealing with angle poisons in rehearsal and just making everyone's life a nightmare, then you probably would have dropped it. But because you could see that it was having an effect and it was worth a bit of pain, then you can stick with it. I think it's the same with musical rules. You know, when it ceases to become useful and you think, oh, sod it, I really want to have that note, even though it doesn't fit into the scheme. I'm going to have it. You know, do what you like.
But it's maybe easier for you where it's a sort of more isolated sport. For me, it's a more collective sport. So a change of a rule or a construction, as we're going to call them this evening, not a limitation, has ricochets through a whole group. So it can be very bad psychology.
That's definitely true. Yeah, when so much of my work is I'm the only person who needs to hear my mistakes.
I know.
And I'll be in my garret.
But we're not allowed to talk about garrets yet.
Oh, we're going to get to garrets,
we're going to get to garrets.
Well, I would say one other thing that's just occurred to me is that with those two pieces that you've mentioned, Wunschkonzert and Waves, there was space in the sort of structure of the text that you were given, rather than, I don't know, something like Pains of Youth, where there's a lot of speaking for a start, and there's a lot of stuff that has to happen in order for the piece to be coherent. Whereas in Wunschkonzert, which is hardly got any text
it's
at all.
It's just a woman, the last half hour of her life, what she does in her flat before taking an overdose. It's incredibly banal. She just goes and sort of cooks a meal, eats it, lies down, gets up, takes an overdose. That's it. There's no words at all.
And so there's loads of space for you to actually exercise any of the constructions that you wanted to impose upon the whole thing.
There was a lot of space, yes.
And also with Waves, although Waves is obviously a really long novel, you had made the sort of editorial decision. Exactly. And so you were able to, without having to consult an angry playwright, you were able to say, actually, we're going to have a 5-minute interlude between these two passages of text, or I'm going to recut it, or I'm going to have this person say this line. And it worked formally, didn't it? Because there was that kind of unreliable narrator thing.
It did, but it made life quite difficult for people like you, or Gareth, the sound designer, because you had to suddenly... The form was changing all the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, we didn't know what it was quite until it had happened.
No.
Okay,
I think we turn that page now.
Let's turn over the
So
page.
nice, we've got a script.
That's right. So I was going to talk about, once again, challenging this idea of the primary-secondary thing. I was going to just talk about how sometimes I actually like following another constructor. The example I was going to do is the radio plays of Beckett. For the Centenary, I did there's several which have music in, words and music, and Cascando are the most famous ones. And we did some new versions for RTE in Ireland. And I loved not being able to impose my own construction on this. You end up writing, again, some very strange stuff. Beckett gives these sort of elusive directions. I don't know if you know the piece, but basically music is one character in it. There's another character called Words, and there's a third character who is the kind of boss man. And both the music and this character are trying to ingratiate themselves to the boss figure who has a staff that he bangs every now and then and says peace if he's had enough of
But the words drive it, don't they? The music has a shoehorn into the words, doesn't it?
Well, the music is an invitation to the composer to come up with something, but he gives little sort of hints. It'll say sentimental or worthy of foregoing is one. Or the one that I'm going to play just says love and soul music. And so it doesn't say anything about how many musicians or anything. Occasionally it says slow or something like that, but that's about the most that you get. But you're trying to fit into the rhythm of the text. It's all sequential, they're not layered on top of each other, or they hardly are at all. So I thought I'd play a little bit of that. Whoops, that's the wrong one.
The face.
Love and soul music.
The face. Seen from above in that radiance so cold and faint, seen from above at such close quarters in that radiance so cold and faint, with eyes so dimmed by what had passed, its quite piercing beauty is a little
my comforts, be friends.
blunted.
It was a bit intense, that acting, wasn't it? It was
Yeah.
beautiful to that bit of acting, don't you think? Just a few frames. We were going to talk about inspirations.
Yes, which is why I've got this Bridget Riley up. This was another one in the script, wasn't it?
It's a good script, this.
So yeah, I mean, sometimes I would say I don't appear to have any rules, do I? Impose these sort of micro rules on each piece, but I pretty much take it where it comes, wherever ideas come from. And sometimes I do use paintings, not really directly, but I'll hear something and then go from that into writing a piece. So I'm a big Bridget Riley fan, especially these ones in the 80s. I really like these ones. I like those too, but I really like these ones. I find them almost completely audible. And I wanted to, I got invited to write a piece. I don't know why I picked Brass Octet, but I did. But what I did is I looked at them and heard some stuff, and then I put them away. I really didn't look at them at all again once I started writing the piece. I just wrote a piece. And I'll play you a little minute of it. I don't know whether I'll leave the picture up, shall I? And we'll see. I have no idea whether what this is going to do to my head to look at the picture and listen to the music.
Don't look away.
Well, I might as well try it, mightn't I?
Okay, yeah, give it a go. my inspiration.
Leading to.
Here she comes, Francesca.
So
for me, I suppose that other people's art acts on the work that I make in two ways. One, there are the sort of, you described them, I think it was very funny, as the long-term bankers. So these are basically the artists who sit deep in the sort of, mixing my metaphors, but anyway, the soil of who you then become. So for me, there are artists like the filmmaker Tarkovsky, like the composer Bach, like the choreographer Pina Bausch, whose work is so deeply inside me that I'm at times embarrassingly sort of, I do bits of it by mistake and I just embarrass myself at my own inadequacies in the light of it when I suddenly see it and go, oh no. So they people are just
the long-term bankers.
bankers.
But what are the short-term loans, Katie?
But then there are other people who, I suppose, although she's on the way to becoming a long-term banker, right. I have to say, Francesca Woodman, she's an amazing American photographer who lived for a very short period of time before killing herself, and did an amazing opus, and so yeah, she is definitely, now I'm saying it, she's definitely on her way to, but anyway, we should stop at the previous one, this one, that one. So for me, your inspiration from your Bridget Riley to your piece of music is very loose, but for me, in some cases, my inspiration is very direct. So I explicitly, with the approval of the estate, lifted this image and put it into a multimedia show, an adaptation of a Dostoevsky novel. So that is a very literal link, if you like, between someone else's work and the work that I'm making. So it was, yes, literally, we had the wallpaper exactly like it. We didn't have the two windows, we just had the bits in it. But so for me, I find sometimes the work of other artists, other than the long-term bankers, they just trigger, and sometimes, yes, one even lifts things directly. But you couldn't lift that, that's just too beautiful, you just couldn't. That's just beautiful.
The other example that we were going to play was the
we're going to play Hanukkah. As part of the work on the
Can I just declare before I clear this desktop that my desktop doesn't usually look like this? It's because it's reconfigured when I put it...
Turn aside, otherwise it reveals too much information, or appears to.
It really looks like I'm the most disorganised person in the world. Oh, you can't see it anyway, it's fine. No one can see it. Okay, great.
So when we make the film and theatre performance work, we're often looking for inspiration in terms of the tone or the quality of the film footage. So when we did Wunsch Concert, which was the, we say the German title because we made it in Germany, it's actually called Request Programme in English. We were looking for a style to shoot the last 30 minutes of a woman's life. You know, what style should we sort of use? A sort of American sort of soft, sentimental style, or something harder? Anyway, then Paul, unfortunately, I say unfortunately because this movie is ghastly, The Seventh Continent. I mean, it's appalling and beautiful. Showed us this filmmaker, Hanukkah, and then we shot the live footage in the style of this film. So here it is.
This is called The Seventh Continent?
Yes.
6 Uhr. Hier ist der österreichische Rundfunk. Die Nachrichten. Zuerst die Schlagzeilen. Der iranische UNO-Botschafter bezeichnet den Angriff amerikanischer Hubschrauber auf iranische Schnellboote im Golf als Kriegserklärung. Heftige Explosion in der irakischen Hauptstadt Bagdad. Der Iran dürfte den Raketenbeschuss wieder aufgenommen haben. Parteichef Gorbatschow ist zu einem baldigen Treffen mit dem deutschen Bundeskanzler Kohl bereit. Und nun die Meldungen. USA, Iran, Irak. Der Iran betrachtet den Angriff amerikanischer Hubschrauber auf 3 iranische Schnellboote im Golf als... Das erklärte der iranische UNO-Botschafter in New York. Er drohte mit Gegenmaßnahmen zu einem geeigneten Zeitpunkt. Unterdessen wurde bekannt, dass die amerikanischen Hubschrauber nicht 3 iranische Boote, sondern nur eine.
Completely not American. And very, very low temperature, therefore, emotionally. And look, he's holding even that, and then a fish to that, which is very sort of...
He's got a real problem with American film, hasn't he? He did that thing, Funny Games. You might have followed that.
Then another door handle. He's just doing door handle, toothbrush, door handle, and then suddenly here...
Aufstehen, Evie.
Yeah, a little bit of emotion, but it's immediately taken from me because you see the back of the woman. You don't see the child, and you go back to the door handle. So this was a way of providing us with a very forensic way of shooting the footage that we generated live of this woman's life. So for me, that would be quite a good trigger for work. We even invited him, but he didn't come. We also invited Pina, but she didn't come. It's very sad, even though she's at Wuppertal, which is very near Cologne, where we were making the work. That was a big tragedy.
I would say, which is sort of leading into the next section, but so many of the things that I do, you've done several pieces using these styles of, or these particular processes of work. I often find that I work on a single piece, especially with Claude, that things like Red Ladies. This is a piece with 18 identically dressed women. There's more there, which we've done absolutely, maybe 3 or 4 years it took to make in various forms. Some indoors, some outdoors, some more sort of choreographed, some with more or less text. Took me loads and loads of musical adventures that I went on before settling on a version which I'm now happy with, which I haven't changed, and hopefully will happen again next year. There's another Red Lady. Or Under Glass. This is another piece that we did. Did it earlier this year. It's lots of performers in these glass containers, and because each of these pieces was performed by itself first, I was able to sort of come up with an individual score for each of these pieces, which is just kind of 7-minute individual solo thing. Then we put them all together in one room, and I realized that I had to completely rethink. Musically, in some cases I had to completely start again. So I ended up sort of being triggered by what I'd myself invited, and also by my collaborator. So Susie was coming up with these images. I realized actually the score that I've come up with for this is no longer of use, and I'd move on to something different. So I was going to place it before and afters, wasn't I? So for example, this is Ranil Olsen. The first time I did this, it was there at Sadler's Wells, this great big place. And I ended up writing this quite sort of epic stuff with a 7-minute solo. I didn't really like it at all, and so grabbed the opportunity the next time round of writing something completely different, but I was aware that she'd choreographed quite a lot of it, so I had to write it in the same tempo, but not to the same meter. So I wrote something, also something which was in the style of the other pieces that I'd written for the various other boxes. So everything had to kind of change, really. Does it play it? Doesn't want to play it, does it?
Definitely doesn't.
Here we go. even more radical example is this one. This is Ramona Nagaczynski. And so this one, maybe it'll probably be obvious why I ditched this idea, but maybe I'll play what I ended up with first. So you recognise this? Sorry, I'm having a few technical... This is what I ended up with. Big glass panel in front, you can't move at all forward or back. Or back kind of away. And that was pretty much a response to the performer and what I knew that she could do. She's such an explosive performer. The first time that I'd done that piece, Wallflower as a solo with different performers, the music was this.
But then that was a funny moment when I came to see that performance, when I heard the second piece, and I went up to you after. I said, I don't really recognise that, because that was not much different to what you then produced for another piece of work that I was making alongside.
And what happened? And so that was an interesting.
It's very, very weird to turn up at one of his shows for his own company and then hear a piece of music that was just like the show you just made with him. It was very. No, it was. I loved it actually. I was very happy with it.
Yes.
It's just how things move across.
Well, so that we're going to get to that a bit, aren't we, later on? Because the situation there was that we were in a workshop or something.
Yeah.
And you said, "Can you play some music?" So I played the music for this Claude piece that I was working on, kind of hoping that you wouldn't like it too much, but it would fill a gap. So I ended up having to rewrite something which was kind of similar.
But
that's what happens. I mean, I find that when I'm thinking about something, I have sort of active notebooks that are ready to sort of fire on any project, and some I'll just flip through and go, no, that one. I want to use that, and it could be, I didn't write it with anyone in particular or anything in mind, but it will just be the idea which feels right for the moment.
The one that amuses me most is your commercial file. Yeah. Sometimes at the moment we're working on Cat in the Hat, Dr. Seuss story for children between 3 and 6 years old, making a piece of theatre for them. So we're doing it in the cartoon style. So you're having to write a lot of cartoon style music. Then there's a wonderful moment where suddenly there is no music, we desperately need it. The fish in the pot is doing an adventure move along a kite string. And then suddenly you open up your commercial file and there's nothing in the notepad at all. There is only what you wrote for
our friends at Intel,
which then gets played. And then tragically we have to hear that unfortunately Intel own it. So the fish escape down the kite wire to the Intel music can't happen.
Yeah.
So we'll end up having some.
It wasn't quite right anyway, so
no, it wasn't entirely right.
So it'd be better to start again.
But I'm aware that we were really under instructions, weren't we? We've just hit a ding an hour, and you know what I like about structure.
Yeah.
So maybe we should ask
open things up. I think
open things up. Where's our hostess? Yes. Alison, should we open things up now we've hit the 8 o'clock? We are. We can stop our script here, can't we? Would you agree?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. People are scared because they've got to have the thing, you know. I wouldn't talk into the thing. Oh, there you go. You got the thing.
Hello, it's a question for Katie. You were talking earlier about the structure structure of a text and what a text is, and I was just wondering if you have an approach to finding the essence of a text, even if it's not the essence that you want to convey. Is there a way of finding the style or the essence of a piece of text?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because if the essence of the text doesn't interest me, I don't do the text. So you couldn't sort of take it away. They're sort of so bound together. And for me, I suppose the clue to where the essence lies will be in the idea structure which underpins the text. That could be just the big sort of headline ideas that a play is about. So most plays have, I don't know, or most bits of literature, they have sort of 3 or 4 big headlines like war and violence, despair, moral collapse, whatever it is, or family. So those would be the things I'm searching for. What are the big headline ideas underneath the written material? And the second doorway, if you like, into the essence would be what's the genre or style? You know, what is it? Is it, like with Chekhov, is it realism or is it symbolism? And they're very, very different things. They're very different ways of angling material. So those are my 2 routes to the essence. But of course, to get essences, you have to do a lot of analytical slog research and reading. You have to slog a lot. They don't just come easy. You don't go, oh, there's the waves. Bing! That's its ideas underpinning it. You have to really analyse the sort of structure and the machinery, if you like, of the piece. But yeah, essences are the things to do. They're the things that are interesting, let's say. And then you can shape how you communicate the words as long as you don't dismantle the essence or the idea structure. It's a performance in itself, isn't it? The running with the microphone.
Yeah. You talk about you have the text, and then you presumably have your collaborators that come into it, your designer and that sort of. Then you have the actors. How much leeway do you give them, and how much does it they change your idea as they start working on the text?
It's not about freedom or leeway. The thing is that actors are very good at doing. Okay, that's what they are there for, to do. What I'm there for is if you like, give them the parameters in which they do the things that they do. So there's no point sort of turning up and going to actors, together, should we read this and find out what the idea structure is or the genre is? And together we go, no, that would be just pointless, because they aren't, their skill base isn't to analyse text. That isn't their skill base. Their skill base is to go, I've analysed it, here's the ideas, here's the genre, you're going to do symbolism, not realism, here are your key headlines, it's family, it's blah, blah, blah. Let's work on that, and then off they go. So, and they're within that, as long as they're within those parameters, they don't suddenly go, oh, it's not about family, I think it's about pink giraffes, and you go, well, that's an interesting proposal, but so for me, it's just, one has to really remember that what their skill base is. And sometimes things can go awry in a rehearsal room because the director wants the actors to feel free and part of the process.
Do you reckon there's a cultural thing about...
I don't know.
I was just thinking about the experience of Germany versus...
That was interesting, wasn't it? Yeah.
The difference in that attitude.
What did you notice?
Well, just that whereas actors that we work with in England would tend to, be happy to defer on certain issues, whereas in Germany often, cameraman B would suddenly talk about what Baudrillard might say about this or whatever.
It's this awful egalitarianism. I'm into hierarchy. I really am. Hierarchy and clear roles. Because it's really complex. To make good live performance is really complicated, it's really time consuming, and you don't want to be going, well, maybe I am the music director and you are not the director, you just don't want to have job description discussions all the time, or to have sort of, I think it was really good, some sound technician who turned up for a day giving his opinion about the metaphysical investigation going on in the rehearsal room. You just don't need it.
No, there's not time, and there's too many people involved in any process to have that amount of depth, isn't there?
But it's a big cultural discussion, isn't it, Germany? And we haven't worked that much there.
No.
Yeah, but yes, maybe it is. Maybe you're right.
Okay. I was just wondering about, you were talking about the rule, choosing a rule on which you're going to work. I don't even know if it works. Anyway, I was wondering if where that rule came from and how you choose it, and like, for example, on the Dostoevsky piece, how did you set that rule? Where did it come from?
Well, we were going to talk a bit later, weren't we, about, I have a very sort of strange 5-year plan sort of way, you know, it's old Lenin system, isn't it, which you find quite entertaining, which is that what I'm tending to do is to work through different practical ideas, thread them through 4 or 5 years' worth of work. So I will look at my work at any moment in time and I will go, oh my God, Katie, you've got real deficiencies there, there and there in the canvas of the work. So you're going to have to sort that out. And that means maybe you need to study some theories of art and you need to apply them over several shows, or maybe there is a weakness in how you're directing actors, so you need to really work on that one area of helping actors play place, for example, might be something that goes through. So for me, the rules tend to emerge as a result of deficiencies that I observe in the work or other people point out to me.
Yeah, sorry.
No, George.
Do you, because it comes from a particular piece, doesn't it? Like the technique that you probably used on the Dostoevsky, does it apply for a particular piece you're going to choose? Do you see what I mean? Like, you've got a deficiency.
Sometimes it does, sometimes not.
Right.
That was a sort of family resemblance between the way of working on Waves, wasn't it? It was a long novel, and so which you'd deconstructed and reassembled, and so again it had some kind of space for doing the stuff with cameras and so on. So I think that was probably one of the things. But people will say, and maybe they're right, that we should only have used that technique for doing Waves. We shouldn't have applied it again and again. So for me, I suddenly went, oh, thank heavens, I've sorted something else out, which I wasn't expecting, which was, I don't perceive things as a well-organised linear narrative. I never have. It's not how I experience myself, my relationships, or the world I live in at all. So I was always looking for something that got me closer to it, and suddenly the multimedia simultaneity work seemed to crystallise it. So in my book, I was to apply it to absolutely everything then for nearly 5 years, which is what I've done. And now people go, oh, it's so boring that why are you just throwing this rule at sort of operas in Salzburg, weird shows in Germany, and, you know, The Idiot. Stop doing that. But they've literally, the rule has come, there is no funding for it anymore, so we have to stop it. But it was funny, wasn't it? End of the 5 years.
Only the Germans keep wanting it. They would pay a lot for it. It's very funny. But in the UK, we will never be able to do it again. That's an example of an annihilated rule.
Yeah. Have we reached a...
We might have, yes. We might have reached the end, which is lovely. Yeah?
We haven't reached the end.
Thank you. This is to both of you, but I'll start with Paul. How do you feel your work's evolved from the very start of your career? And how did you, I don't even know how to put this, how did you begin the first evolution and then keep evolving?
Well, I started doing acoustic music. That's what I was interested in, classical music. And I did that for a long time. It was more of a sort of 15-year plan. And I became interested. I'd say there's so much craft and stuff involved in getting half decent at that it was really obvious where to go. You know, that really, I can't do that, I have to try and do that, work harder at that, just keep chipping away at the craft of doing it. It's also being led by the projects that I was being invited to do, I think. So I was, from having a company that was doing performance, I was getting invited to do opera and that kind of thing. So that also created new problems that I hadn't even expected to face, like setting text and things like that. So it was a mixture of having I had a sort of loyalty to live music, and then at a certain point, I kind of lost that loyalty, and now I'm quite happy to use recorded elements and manipulate sort of spoken sound, or just use whatever. Partly it's because the technology has caught up. I did one thing absolutely years ago when I was just doing acoustic music. It was a piece by David Greenspan called Jack, which was a piece for 3 parallel texts that I really liked, but it was almost impossible to do in the technology, which was sort of reel-to-reels in those days. And now it's really easy to edit. I can actually make the ideas that I heard happen. So that's my current plan. I have a sort of a 5-year plan, which I'm about 2 or 3 years through at the moment, although I didn't realise it was a plan until I was halfway through that period. And now I've got a couple of years' work, I would say, to see whether that's going to be 15 years or
we were laughing earlier to say that I know which 5-year plan period I'm in at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And you was just saying that 2 years in a 5-year plan, he discovers he's in the middle of a 5-year plan. That really made me laugh.
Yeah, I've just realised everything that I'm doing is sort of, that there's so many things that are sort of interchangeable about the way that I'm working. What about you?
Well, I just think evolution is so difficult, isn't it, to talk about. It's a long game. I think any craft that you sort of head on into, if you really look at it and try to work out how to do it, you suddenly realise how complex it is, and how much, just to learn how to move actors on stage whilst they're talking with objects in a way that the audience believe that it is like life whilst they're being watched by 500 people and feeling very frightened, is about a decade to literally be able to do that, credibly for about 10 minutes. And so for me, that, rather like you, it's just, you just go, oh, I'd really like to do that, and then you open the door and go, oh my God, that's so hard. And then you find yourself having spent a decade doing that. And at the end of that decade you go, do you know, I don't think the linear narrative and the way of doing that is actually accurate. So you go, oh, I'll just pull that aside. You go, oh no, open another door. Fucking hell, it's really hard to do simultaneity now. That's really difficult. And then you're stuck with another craft problem that you need to get better, and there's another decade goes by. That's my experience of it. I don't remember time, like in years. Someone says, what were you doing in 1991? I just can't tell you. I couldn't tell you or what was happening in 2000. I don't have any sense of years passing. I just have the sense of having opened one of the doors, looked in, seen a problem, and then just like going underwater, like the fish in the Cat in the Hat goes underwater, just being underwater, and then coming up. So I just remember when I came up, and then someone says, do you know, Katie, that was 8 years. And I go, oh, I didn't experience it like that at all. And someone told me the other day, they keep having to tell me, that I'm 45. Just don't experience it like that. But it is, because all this time has passed. When I've been underwater doing these things, they will come up and look, oh my God, you're 45, go down!
You spend a lot of time in the rehearsal room, don't you? So you don't have a lot of pause for thought, I would say. We worked out that you spent 48 weeks,
but I have to, because I'm a single mum, so I have to earn a lot, actually. That's the only reason it's 48. It wouldn't quite be, but I do spend 48 weeks a year, in a rehearsal room. So it's like working for IBM, just go in at 10:30, creative problems, deal with them, biff, 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 5:30 home, and you just do that for weeks and weeks on end. It's very different to you in your lovely garret.
Yes, I have a garret.
Oh, I'm so jealous. There you are. You sit in your garret with all your instruments and their boxes, all your books, blank pages everywhere. Yeah. What's that like?
Well, it's kind of like, well, when we were talking earlier, I described it as being my garret. That's the sort of sauna, and the rehearsal room is this cold bath where you sort of plunge pool, where suddenly your ideas get completely transformed and you weren't expecting them to feel like that at all. Yeah. I mean, I really like it. I'm very, very happy to spend large amounts of time by myself, and it's sort of an unavoidable part of the job. I find it really difficult. Like Gareth, the sound designer that we work with, he only works in the rehearsal room, doesn't he? He stays on a bit longer, perhaps, but he does all the stuff.
You know, it's so interesting. He cannot imagine outcomes. So he says, well, I can't design the show until you do a run-through. And I'm going, but Gareth, you can imagine it. You know, you've seen that rehearsal. Just string them together in your imagination. He can't, can he? It's really weird. Yeah. So he doesn't know that lovely space, the garret space, which I get less of than I would like, but you get all the time. He doesn't know how you sit in that place and you run the film, if you like, or the soundtrack of the piece of work you're going to make, and you imagine it, and you doesn't get that at all. It's really weird, isn't it?
I think, but maybe it's partly habit. I mean, if you've got,
it's true.
If he's always has spent lots of time in the rehearsal room.
But he does spend like last night. He was up till the night before, up till 4:30. Doing something at home in the garret space, and I didn't know what to say, so I thought, then, but you still want the run-through, so what do you do in your garret space? Actually, we must ask him.
I didn't know he had the garret space. We'll find out tomorrow.
He does, and I went there, and he has one of the chairs on wheels.
Yeah.
It's no decor at all in it.
Yeah.
An office. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, you see that the floor goes along, and then there's that wheel there, it dips down like that, so it's like a sort of little... how do you say? What's that? At the floor. Can't do words. You know I can't do words. A ditch. A ditch where the chair has just gone like that. You know?
Oh, I see.
Like that. It must have gone like that for hours and hours on end. Like this.
Subsidence.
Well, yeah, and the floor has literally been worn away. So he does. But in his garret, he does what I would never do, which is... He does that all the time. It's really weird.
Like to keep
Maybe
still.
he would be much better to come to one of these events. Maybe we should ask Gareth to do one.
Yes, I think we should.
This is just a question for both of you. In terms of influences, do you embrace or avoid being influenced by people who work in the same discipline? Or is that just an unconscious thing, being influenced by them?
Wow, it's kind of unavoidable, isn't it? I'd say, I mean, I remember being really, really influenced in very obvious ways, you know, and I used to just do pastiches consciously and just write. I used to do, you know, I would I'd literally get a score of Beethoven and literally just copy it out, not make up my own version, just literally copy it out just to see what it felt like to write a bit of Beethoven. Not in an emotional sense, just to see, because it's only by writing things. If you scan over it and listen to the music and the score, or even play through it, it's slightly different. You just have to slow your brain down. The compositional speed is slightly different.
It's like Glenn Gould pressing each note on the Goldberg variation, taking 39 hours to do it. Blimey.
It just gets you in a different, because when you're writing music, you have to sort of flip between different speeds. So I will have my big sheets of paper, well, run the idea through in my head and be going, and just writing something which looks like a picture, bad picture. And then before I forget, go back to the beginning and flesh it out, for which you have to sort of slow yourself down. So for me, it was interesting to just pick composers that I like and literally do something at their speed, and you just go, oh my God, it's done that, I hadn't even realised, hadn't even noticed. So, and then I would write things that are heavily labouring under the influence of other composers. You know, I was really into Ligeti, I was really into Schnittke, and I think that I've sort of broken free a bit, but I'm sure that I
think they come like that, don't they? I studied Pina Bausch's, the DVDs of Pina Bausch's work, frame by frame, in Michael Morris's office. because I thought, I have to understand, rather like you were saying, I have to understand why this is an artist whose work, when I see it, I cannot watch the construction of it. So I cannot be a director. I just can't be a director. Can't watch the construction. I'm overwhelmed by the sensations. So I did it frame by frame, and I saw the level of construction. What you think she's doing is not what she's doing. What she's doing, that's not about the choreography of the dancers. That was the surprising. That isn't actually where a lot of the construction is going, although it is an enormous, profound component of her work. It was the use of colour and light. Oh my God, it was so cunning. And texture. The texture she would use of certain types of material, chiffons and silk, layering silk and chiffon on top, and then the colour of it very close to skin colour. And then I noticed there were these spotlights. She has follow spots working with must have been gels on the lights, which are very certain type of gel. And then this would be sort of on a sort of like peach-coloured silk chiffon, certain types of movement, the gel of the light. And then the backdrop would be a certain type of texture, the floor. Oh, it was like you were doing the notes of Beethoven. Just profound. Some people's skill is like sort of just bow out. But I always feel I end up being derivative. Except for, I was very joyful with Pina Bausch's, not joyful, I mean she died and that was just awful. But I was able to consciously do an homage. So I was in Salzburg, and we just gratuitously put red carnations right across the stage, and gratuitously did a lot of things in very, very consciously as a nod to her amazing work, which was lovely. But I always feel they always catch you out, those influences. You think you've broken free. They head off. You are your own artist, and then suddenly you just go back to a show. You've seen it for a few weeks. You go back and go, ouch. That's just embarrassing. That's just borrowed. That isn't accurate. But I find the best way of not getting influenced by what's going on is to be a single mother with a 4-year-old. That means that basically you can't see anything, because all the evenings that you have the money to pay for your childcare is your technicals and your preview periods. So basically you have to be at home the rest of the time, which is joyful, which means you don't get to see more than 2 plays a year. And that is a really, really efficient way of not being influenced by anything that's going on. I went to see my first play, my second. I saw Under Glass was the first thing I saw this year, back in April. Spring, and then I saw my second thing last night was The Habit of Art. They were very different pieces of work, I can fairly say. But it was fascinating. But I say, see less theatre is really good. Really good. Lovely, it's over, isn't it? We're only supposed to go this long. I've got the clock there. We're done, aren't we, Alison? Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.